Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Duthier. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. Let's begin. A possible turning point in Gaza after Israel kills Hamas's top leader and the mastermind of the October 7th attacks. Plus, the judge overseeing the former president's federal election interference case is set to unseal new evidence today. What we expect to learn. And the Swifties are descending out of Miami, where the final leg of Taylor Swift's Eras Tour is set to begin. We'll go there as all the excitement builds. Can't wait for that. This is CBS News 24/7. All right, let's start in the Middle East. The Lebanese-based Hezbollah militant group has vowed to launch a new phase of fighting against Israel as more projectiles were fired from Lebanon into northern Israel this morning. Now, this all comes one day after Israel confirmed its forces killed the alleged mastermind of Hamas's October 7th attacks, Yahya Sinwar. Joining us now from Tel Aviv is CBS News reporter Haley Ott. Haley, we were talking earlier this morning with Margaret Brennan about the significance of this kill. Break it down for us.
Yes, and actually this morning we have more information. Hamas, the group, has officially confirmed Sinwar's death. We had not heard officially from them up until this point. We also have more information from the IDF, who's spoken to journalists just a few minutes ago. They laid out the operation and the events that took place that resulted in Sinwar's death. They said that troops in the Rafah area of Gaza were just going about an ordinary patrol. They didn't have any specific intelligence that Sinwar was around. They weren't specifically targeting him. And they came across 3 militants, 2 who were wrapped in blankets, 1 who was walking behind in a vest. They engaged with one another. There was a firefight. The 2 militants in the front ran into a building. The man in the vest ran into a different building. The IDF engaged with the 2 militants in the one building first. They killed those 2 Hamas fighters, and then they moved on to the 3rd building, where they sent a drone up to look at what was going on there. The IDF has released drone video. We can't independently verify that, but they say it shows Sinwar in his final moments. At that time, they didn't know that this was Sinwar. He is sitting, just holding still. He's wounded. He eventually notices the drone. He turns around. He throws something at it. The IDF then says after that, they fired on that building. The building collapsed. Sinwar was killed. Now, this operation took hours. It began in the late morning, early afternoon, and it didn't wrap up until the evening after dark. So the Israeli military, decided not to go in and investigate after at that point and wait until the morning. And it was only then, when they went in to investigate, that they recognized that perhaps the person they'd been engaging with was the leader of Hamas, and the process to identify that body began. And now we know that he was, in fact, killed in that operation.
Wow, Haley Ott with some very interesting details coming into her and to us here at CBS News 24. It is remarkable, Haley, that with all the intelligence that the Israelis had, the Israeli military, that this just happened to be a chance encounter with the IDF and these 3 militants. And, of course, it brought about the demise of the man who was the mastermind of the October 7th deadly, horrific attack on Israel and its citizens. Haley Ott with those important details for us this morning. Thank you, Haley. Appreciate it. All right, for more on the impact of Sinwar's death, I want to bring in CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan. So Margaret, you heard the details there from Haley as to how the IDF was able to locate Sinwar. It happened to be a chance encounter with those soldiers. But now let's talk about how significant this death is.
Vlad, it's very significant. It presents a potential opportunity that certainly President Biden and the U.S. government hopes the Israeli prime minister will seize at this period of time. The White House calls Hamas significantly weakened. Yahya Sinwar was uniquely powerful as a military commander on the ground, the architect of that deadly October 7th attack, and then more recently as a political leader, an obstacle to a potential diplomatic deal. But now, the question is, what does the Israeli prime minister choose to do with this momentum he has? A political win, a strategic win. Israel's killed Hamas leaders before. What does this do to actually change things on the ground? And from the beginning, the Biden administration has been frustrated that the Israeli government has not articulated what a political settlement would look like. You'll hear more about that in the coming days because the Secretary of State is headed to the region to try to press on that and also to press for the release of the remaining hostages. There are still around 100 Israelis being held by Hamas, at least 4 of them U.S. citizens. And it's not clear what their fate will be. A diplomatic settlement could be possible. We'll have to see if there is any work to be done on that.
Yeah, that was my first thought, Margaret, when I heard the news about Yahya Sinwar's death, which is that we know from reports that as Israeli soldiers got close to him at a previous time, he had surrounded himself with hostages. He had those hostages brutally executed. And so my fear, and I think for a lot of people the fear, is what is the fate of the remaining hostages now that he's been taken out of the picture. But I want to pivot to your remarkable sit-down with Paul Whelan. You brought us the very first interview since he was released from a Russian prisoner that happened in a prisoner swap 2 months ago. We have a little bit of sound from that interview, and then we can talk about it.
From day one, I was being told that there would be a trade, a political solution to the situation. But as it dragged on, you know, it did play with my mind. There was a psychological piece to this that even though now, you know, I seem like I'm doing okay, I've put back on some of the weight that I lost. You know, I see a picture of me from the prison, or I see a picture of me from court that's on TV, and that takes me back to being in that court or being in the prison.
You have PTSD.
Yeah, it's a form of PTSD. And it's common, you know, with people that have been in this situation. It'll go away probably over a few years, but it's hard to, you know, compartmentalize and block out that portion of what I went through.
And I can only imagine, Margaret, the psychological toll that not just being imprisoned would take, but, for example, when he heard that there were some prisoners like Brittany Griner being released, and he wasn't part of that release and that initial release. What did he tell you about that moment?
Well, Vlad, this was the most difficult part of what Paul Whelan experienced, as he described it being twice left behind, abandoned, as he put it, he felt, by the U.S. government in those back-to-back prisoner swaps, one for Trevor Reed, a former Marine, then later for Brittany Griner. But Paul Whelan, who had been imprisoned for the longest, was not traded. And this was hard for him. He describes the moment where he was told he was on the line in the factory sewing buttons on uniforms he was forced to make in the factory on this Russian labor camp grounds in freezing conditions, pulled out of there and told the White House just called. And he got on the line and he was informed by a U.S. official that this transaction was happening to bring Griner back without him. And he said it was the lowest point. He didn't begrudge the other Americans going home, but he said, what do you have left to trade for me? He knew, he was aware through the years that the Russian government wanted to use the Americans as leverage to get back high-value prisoners. They call it hostage diplomacy. Rogue states literally taking Americans because of the blue passport they hold and using it as leverage. Vladimir Putin did that. He got back an arms dealer, Victor Bout. He got back other high-value prisoners, a drug dealer in exchange for Trevor Reed. And then ultimately, in this landmark deal, in August, the United States did manage to get back Paul Whelan and 2 journalists by arranging for an international trade, one of them involving an assassin, a convicted assassin sitting in jail in Germany for shooting someone in broad daylight in the middle of Berlin. Vladimir Putin wanted him back, and he got him. He got him through this trade because he knew the American government doesn't leave Americans behind when they are determined to be wrongfully detained, as Paul Whelan was here. In other words, the U.S. government says all these charges against Whelan were trumped up, and he lost about 5 years of his life waiting for his government to get him.
Well, now, of course, I'm sure his family, obviously, and we, his fellow Americans, are so happy that he's home. And I know, note, Margaret, that you had an interesting detail earlier this morning where you said he didn't actually even believe it himself. Paul didn't believe that he was being released until he saw the White Cliffs of Dover in Britain. Yeah, such remarkable detail. You're going to have a lot more of your interview with Paul Whelan on Margaret. We'll have that interview with Paul Whelan on Face the Nation. beginning this Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern on CBS. Margaret, as always, we thank you, my friend. Appreciate it. Okay, let's talk about President Biden, who is making a final diplomatic farewell to Germany today. After meeting with the German president, he addressed European nations and NATO allies about regional security in the Middle East. He called the death of Hamas's leader, Yahya Sinwar, a moment of justice. Let's listen.
The death of the leader of Hamas represents a moment of justice. He had the blood of Americans and Israelis, Palestinians and Germans and so many others on his hands. I told the Prime Minister of Israel yesterday, let's also make this moment an opportunity to seek a path to peace, a better future in Gaza without Hamas.
CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman is in Berlin, where the president is about to depart, and he joins me now to discuss. So let's talk about this, Willie James. This is Biden's last foreign trip as president. How critical are his words of diplomacy before we welcome a new administration? In other words, do his words still carry weight, even though we're essentially in a lame duck administration?
Well, that certainly seems to be the case, at least here with the Germans, Vlad. The president met with both the president of Germany and the prime minister, who is essentially a close partner in all of this in terms of the NATO alliance, in terms of the G7. He also met, or is currently meeting with the leaders of the United Kingdom and France as well to talk about a path forward and continuing that support for Ukraine. I'll note in this conversation, and it's the chancellor, by the way, not the prime minister, he talked about supporting Ukraine, but he also talked about the situation in the Middle East as you played there. The president also thanked Germany for their continued support, for that financial support for Ukraine, but also for hosting U.S. troops and for being a pivotal part of bringing those Americans, including Paul Whelan, home just months ago. The president personally thanked German leaders for their support there. And I also want to point out, this is something that the Europeans are watching closely. The president of Germany gave some comments during those remarks when President Biden received one of the highest honor, civilian honor here in Germany. He was bestowed with that award. The president of Germany, President Steinmeier said, "Sir, when you were elected president, you restored Europe's hope in the transatlantic alliance literally overnight." So in their eyes, President Biden was the one to carry the torch and to bring those alliances closer together, as we're seeing play out with the president here in Germany today, Vlad.
All right, Willie James Inman for us in Berlin this morning. Thank you, Willie James. We can expect to learn more today about the election interference case against former President Donald Trump. There's some new evidence that's going to be unsealed after a federal judge ruled against Trump's request to block its release before Election Day. Let's bring in CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson to break it all down for us. All right, Jessica, so what can we expect to see today in this evidence filed by the special counsel, Jack Smith?
So I think what we can expect is more color. Vlad, you and I know, and people watching know the broad strokes here. This is the election interference case, and the evidence will deal with former President Trump's alleged attempts to undermine the election, to say don't certify the election. Last time around, when part of this case, part of the allegations by special counsel Jack Smith's team were released, the new thing we learned is the allegation that Trump was told Mike Pence's life was really at risk. And he said, yeah, so what? And so I think we can expect to hear not more about legal charges, but Vlad, more of those details, more about how he allegedly tried to interfere with the certification and get others to help him do so.
All right, that's happening today. Jessica Levinson for us this morning. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
All right, turning now to weather, let's bring in CBS News senior national weather correspondent Rob Marciano with the first look at the national forecast. Good to see you, my friend.
Hey, Vlad, you know, we're not just talking today. Let's talk about the next 3 months. How about that, all right? The CPC, NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, has put out their seasonal forecast, what it's going to look like for this winter. And we're going into a La Nina. It's one of the reasons the hurricane season was so active. Last year, we were at El Nino. So what La Nina does, it brings the jet stream higher up. Northern states like the Northwest and parts of the Great Lakes will likely see a more active scenario as far as wet conditions. The Northeast, before you even ask, is kind of in between here. So it's hard to say exactly how tough our winter will be. But they've been pretty lame the past few years. Break it down more succinctly. Warm down across the south, above average temperatures in the Northeast, below average temperatures in the Northwest, where that jet stream is going to be parked for the most part, and warming up in the next 12 hours. How's that sound? You've been very chilly across the eastern two-thirds of the country, and we're bouncing back today to at or just slightly below normal, and some snows are coming into the Pacific Northwest and the Rockies. We'll talk more about that in the next half hour. Vlad?
All right, Rob, talk to you in the next half hour, my brother. Thank you.
You got it.
A last-minute appeal halted the execution of a Texas man just hours before he was set to be put to death. We're going to have details about the unusual bipartisan intervention that spared his life and what's next in the case. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. All right, turning now to politics in the campaign trail. Last night, former President Donald Trump attended the Alfred E. Smith Memorial Foundation dinner, a decades-old Catholic fundraiser in New York, where politicians gently roast each other. Harris was not in attendance. That's the former Vice President Kamala Harris was not in attendance, opting instead for a recorded video, and Trump took the opportunity to call her out.
My opponent feels like she does not have to be here, which is deeply disrespectful to the event. But if you really wanted Vice President Harris to accept your invitation, I guess you should have told her the funds were going to bail out the looters and rioters in Minneapolis, and she would have been here.
All right, for more on the Trump campaign, I want to bring in CBS News campaign reporter Olivia Rinaldi. She's joining me from Washington, D.C. this morning. So, Olivia, the former president, again, went after Harris's intelligence, saying that she needed, or she seemed to have, the mental faculties of a child. It didn't seem to go over well with the crowd. I think that, as you know, the Smith dinner is one where politicians do gently roast each other. It's all meant to be sort of very bipartisan. But it also felt like last night, what we heard from the former president was his list of grievances that he's had since 2020.
Yeah, Vlad, you mentioned gentle roasting. There didn't feel anything much gentle about the way Donald Trump approached people last night in his roasting, talking about Vice President Kamala Harris and her mental abilities, talking about her husband, second gentleman Doug Emhoff, and rumors about his history with women. A lot of below-the-belt jokes that he was making, but also having some riffs on Mayor Eric Adams, the embattled mayor of New York right now, making jokes about, even though he's a vegan, making jokes about him enjoying turkey, with some of the allegations there with his doings with turkey as well. So a lot of these jokes being made, you know, keeping Trump off of the campaign trail. But this is a decades-old tradition that presidential candidates take part in. And Vice President Harris, as you mentioned, was not there. She's the first presidential candidate since Walter Mondale in 1984 to not join this event last night. So it raises money for Catholic charities. A lot of joking between the MC and former President Donald Trump as he was there last night. But later on today, he'll be getting back out on the campaign trail, visiting some battleground states.
All right, Olivia Rinaldi for us, reporting from Washington this morning. Thanks, Olivia. All right, let's turn to the Harris campaign. She continues her battleground blitz today in Michigan. She did do some of her own roasting last night while she was in Green Bay, Wisconsin. We played a little bit of it for you earlier. She mocked former President Trump's new claims that he's the father of IVF. Listen.
It just gets more unbelievable sometimes. And now the man calls himself the father of IVF? I mean, what does that even mean? He has no idea what he's talking about. When it comes to the health care of women in America.
All right, for more on the Harris camp, let's bring in Aaron Navarro. He's joining us now from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Aaron, with just 18 days to go until Election Day, those jabs that the vice president is directing at the former president, how are they being received by voters?
Yeah, there's two new jabs that Harris is deploying. The first is the one that you played in regards to abortion rights, saying, referencing Trump saying he was, quote, the father of IVF, and then Harris kind of flabbergasted, saying Trump has no idea what he's talking about when it comes to health care for women. And that's especially prevalent here for Democrats and women in Wisconsin, where just a couple years ago after the Dobbs decision, there was an 1800s abortion ban that was very restrictive that Democrats were successful in overturning. It's an issue that's really prevalent for voters here. One of the doctors who led the effort to overturn that ban was running for Congress and got a healthy reception in the pre-program remarks last night in Green Bay.
So, Aaron, one of the questions that I think people will have is, was it a mistake for the vice president to miss this Alfred E. Smith dinner? Both candidates for both parties have been attending this dinner since time immemorial. I think the last time somebody skipped it was back in the 1990s or maybe even earlier. Did the camp tell you exactly why she chose not to attend?
From talking to Democrats, it seems that just given where the race is at, given this tight snap election that, Harris jumping in late, they couldn't afford to lose any time away from the battleground states. That's why she's been in the blue wall for such days on end in the battleground states. So they prioritized being in Wisconsin, and she's in Michigan today over this tradition, you're right, happening in New York City.
Yeah, Walter Mondale, Vice President Walter Mondale was the last candidate to not attend. So that is going back a couple of years. I don't think you were around back then, Aaron, but I certainly was because I'm old. Let's talk about the Obamas who are finally set to campaign in person alongside the vice president. What do we know about that?
We know that Barack Obama will join Vice President Harris next Thursday in the battleground state of Georgia. And then Michelle Obama will join her next Saturday on the campaign trail as well, I believe, in Michigan. That will be her first trip on the campaign trail for Michelle Obama, the former First Lady, and probably the first political speech we've seen her give since her notable DNC speech in Chicago in August.
All right, Aaron Navarro for us this morning. Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it. The long-awaited Delphi murder trial is underway. The suspect confessed dozens of times to killing 2 teenage girls back in 2017, but there is zero physical evidence in the case. We're live at the courthouse. Next, you're streaming CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following. New charges in the deadliest school shooting in Georgia's history. A grand jury has indicted the alleged Appalachia High School shooter on a total of 55 counts. 4 are for malice murder. The teen faces the possibility of life in prison. His father, Cullen, was also indicted on murder charges. And now to some incredible video out of Hawaii. This is the moment a 17-year-old kayaker was pulled from the water in pitch darkness. Crews had been searching for him for more than 10 hours. He was finally spotted just after 4 a.m. Thursday and treated for hypothermia, dehydration, and exhaustion, but he is okay. And a historic visit to Australia for King Charles and Queen Camilla. It's the first ever visit down under for the royal couple, who are set to arrive in Sydney today. As the reigning British monarch, Prince Charles is still recognized as the King of Australia. Opening statements are set for today in the long-awaited trial of a man accused of the 2017 killing of 2 teenage girls in Delphi, Indiana. Richard Allen is charged with the murder of a 13-year-old, her name Abby Williams, and 14-year-old Libby German. He faces 130 years in prison if convicted. CBS News correspondent Meg Oliver is covering this trial for us. She's at the courthouse in Delphi this morning. So, Meg, it's good to see you. Walk us through the 2017 killings. What happened?
Yeah, good morning, Vlad. The opening statements are underway at the courthouse behind me. Delphi, Indiana, just to set the scene a little bit, is a small, tight-knit community of 3,000 people, and the murders of these 2 8th graders, best friends, rocked this town. It happened on February 23rd, 2017. The 2 girls were out for a walk on a trail when they never returned home. The next day, their bodies were found stabbed to death about a half a mile away from that trail. Over the years, police released a couple sketches of a man that they were looking for. They interviewed multiple suspects. They even were able to get some grainy footage off of one of the girls' cell phones. But no arrests were made until 2022. That's when police zeroed in on Richard Allen, a local pharmacy employee. And it was actually the second time they interviewed him. Back in 2017, the defense says he went to police and told them he lives about 5 miles from that trail and was in that area the day of the murders. Now, fast forward back to 2022, Vlad, when they re-interviewed him, they connected an unspent casing found at the scene with one of Allen's guns. Now, what's fascinating about this case is there's virtually no physical evidence. There's no DNA, there's no weapon, and there's no motive yet. So today, the prosecution is going to lay out that Allen, over the last 2 years, confessed to these murders nearly 60 times. But the defense is going to counter that he didn't do so voluntarily and that he was mentally ill at the time. Vlad?
So I guess, Meg, the question here is, as you know, Richard Allen has pleaded not guilty to murder, but give us a sense of the arguments the defense is using to plead that case for innocence.
Yeah, so Vlad, when you look at the two sketches that were released and you look at Richard Allen, he does not resemble these two sketches at all. I talked to a defense attorney who's been following this case closely, and he says this is not a slam dunk for the prosecution at all. Again, there's no real physical evidence here, so it's going to come down to a timeline. And we're not going to see or hear a lot from this trial because there are no cameras allowed in court. There's only a sketch artist and a pool reporter taking handwritten notes. They will come out at some point today. We don't know when, to give us an update. The judge is trying to ensure that there is a fair trial here. She has issued a gag order. Nobody is talking, and the jury will be sequestered for the length of this trial, which could last more than a month. They had to give up all of their devices, including cell phones. They can't even make a supervised phone call without a bailiff standing nearby.
Wow. All right, Meg Oliver reporting from Delphi, Indiana for us this morning. Meg, thank you very much. A death row inmate lives to see another day after the Texas Supreme Court halted its execution yesterday. This man, Robert Robertson, was convicted of killing his 2-year-old daughter back in 2002. It would have been the first U.S. execution tied to shaken baby syndrome. But as CBS News national correspondent Nikki Batiste reports, some last-minute legal moves have actually spared his life.
Good morning. Robert Robertson's life has been spared for now. In what was one of his last lifelines, a bipartisan group of Texas lawmakers issued a subpoena requiring Robertson to testify at a hearing next week as they reconsider the lawfulness of his case. And just 90 minutes before he was set to die by lethal injection, a Texas judge issued a restraining order to essentially keep Robertson alive so he could testify next week. And ultimately, the Texas Supreme Court agreed and issued a stay for his execution. The lead detective in this case, who now argues that Robertson is innocent, was inside the prison last night when he came out. He said it was incredibly emotional and he felt such relief that there's at least a little bit more time. Robertson's lawyers have argued that his daughter did not die from shaken baby syndrome, as has been alleged, but rather an autopsy showed she died from pneumonia. So the next step, we expect Robertson to testify Monday in front of a state house committee. A prison spokesperson said when he learned of the stay, he praised God and thanked his supporters. Vlad?
Nikki Batiste reporting for us. Thank you. As we've been reporting, the Lebanese-based Hezbollah militant group has vowed to launch a new phase of fighting against the state of Israel as more projectiles were fired from Lebanon into northern Israel this morning. Now, this comes one day after Israel confirmed its forces killed the alleged mastermind of Hamas's October 7th attacks, Yahya Sinwar. President Biden reacted to Sinwar's death by declaring justice had been served, igniting hopes that attempts to end the war may restart. CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie Daggett joins me now to talk about this. So, Charlie, how does Sinwar's death alter the diplomatic and strategic moves the United States is trying to make to end this war? And I was thinking about this earlier, Charlie. My mind drifted to Operation Valkyrie in 1944. That was the operation, as you know very well, where Hitler's lieutenants and the general staff around him plotted to have him killed so that they thought that would be a way to end the war at a faster pace. And I know it's not exactly similar in the sense that you have a lot of different, what Hamas is very different from the state of the Empire of Germany, Nazi Germany back then. But I do wonder if there's anybody in that circle that is saying, we've had enough, it's time to end the bloodshed, time to end putting innocent people's lives at risk by the actions that our group has taken. Let's figure out a way to bring about a ceasefire.
Yeah, you know, Vlad, Sinwar has been the driving force of this from October 7th and long before that. As far as the Pentagon and the White House are concerned, his death has created a massive opportunity. Speaking in Brussels this morning, the Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, said it renewed hopes to release the remaining hostages. It's a chance for the ceasefire to take hold. In his words, end this awful war. He said his death removes a huge obstacle, and that's the kind of language we're hearing a lot, blaming him for standing in the way of peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And that echoes statements and sentiments by National Security spokesman John Kirby, who said Sinwar's death provides what he called an inflection point to ending the war. But the peace talks have stalled. I mean, they stalled weeks ago. There hasn't been any real progress to speak of. And Kirby actually said, I wish I could tell you we were getting our teams back together in Doha, but that's not where we are right now. And I think, importantly, the language from both sides of the fight itself isn't encouraging. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last night vowed that the war would continue even after Sinwar was eliminated, as the Israelis put it, using that word. And a Hamas representative said this morning Sinwar's death would only increase our solidarity and strengthen us. But that said, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is trying to take this opportunity to jumpstart talks. But that really means getting Hamas to the negotiating table. And that seems a long way off this morning.
All right, Charlie Daggett reporting from the Pentagon for us. Thank you, Charlie. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Vlad.
Let's dig a little deeper into this. I want to bring in IDF International spokesperson Major Doron Spielman to talk about what is happening on the ground right now. Sir, thanks so much for spending some time with us. I know you're incredibly busy, but tell us, I find it remarkable that with all the technology, all the intelligence that the IDF has, that essentially, you know this as an officer in the Army, that three, or I guess a number of really, really good soldiers just on patrol ultimately found Sinwar unexpectedly. And that is kind of remarkable in any type of military operation. But as you know, it happens frequently.
Thank you for having me, Vlad. I think that, Sinwar didn't fall from the sky. That would have been a great stroke of good luck. We did have some good luck, though, and these were not standard patrols. We have to understand that the IDF was operating on the assumption that there were terrorist commanders of Hamas operating in that area of southern Gaza, which is known as Rafah. We were acting on that intel, and the way that we moved forward through this area was restricting the movements of those terrorists to a narrower and narrower corridor, with the hope that senior terrorists, obviously Sinwar being the most amongst them, would leave their tunnel hideouts and try to seek shelter in another area like a fugitive and make a mistake. And in fact, that plan did work. We were lucky that it was Sinwar that did this. He moved into a building that had already been shelled. He was hiding out in the building with two other people. In fact, he made his last mistake, which was that they actually fired towards Israeli troops, attracting our attention. As we came closer, they threw grenades at our troops. We then shelled the structure. Sinwar was separated from the other two people who were guarding him. He fled with money and IDs. He's sitting in the chair exactly as you're showing on the screen. Our drone moves into the room and shows us that there is a jihadi terrorist who is there, tries to throw something at the drone, at which point a shell is fired by a tank towards the building, and the evil mastermind of October 7th, who is Israel's Osama bin Laden, was thankfully eliminated. So it wasn't all luck, but trust me, we'll take whatever luck we can get.
Absolutely. And thank you for that play-by-play of that video, giving us the details of what we're actually seeing on the screen there. So now let's talk about the concerns of what this means for the fate of the hostages. It's been reported that the last time the IDF got close to Sinwar, he had surrounded himself with some of those hostages, and during his attempt to flee, he had those hostages brutally executed. I don't know if you can confirm that, but that is the reporting that we've seen. And so now, of course, folks who are worried about their loved ones are concerned about the fate of the remaining hostages. What is your understanding?
First of all of us are not only concerned, we're torn apart personally by these hostages. Just to put this in perspective, Israel is a country the size of New Jersey. It's a total population of 10 million people. And to have over 1,000 people killed and 250 hostages, 101 of which remains, Each family, including my own, knows families whose children are hostages or grandparents who are hostages. It's the first thing we wake up in the morning and think to, and it's the last thing we go to think about before we go to sleep at night. It's an incredibly difficult situation. We understand at its very core, Sinwar and Hamas took those hostages to use them as a bargaining chip. They are the last bargaining chip that they're going to use. They could care less about the lives of these hostages, and there's no goodwill here whatsoever. We, along this campaign, have been operating surgically to try and rescue our hostages. We've managed a few times. However, the key to this very well may be what happened last night with the toppling of Sinwar and all of his terror operatives. Seeing the head of that organization fall, it disables that organization. It causes it to be a shakeup. And as the Prime Minister said, as President Biden said, and Kamala Harris, there could be an opportunity here. We're able to move this to the next level. We want to bring our people home, but we cannot give Hamas a pass. There can be no ceasefire that enables that terror entity to survive in Gaza. If that happens, the next round of hostages is just waiting around the corner.
Let me ask you about this, Major. The IDF, as you know, is obviously continuing its operations in Gaza, but so people will look at this, and it's not just Yahya Sinwar that you've been able to take out. You've taken out many, including predecessor leaders of this organization and others. Do you feel that you're achieving your objectives, your military objectives? I know the ultimate objective is to bring those hostages home and to destroy Hamas, but how do you feel you are along the path, the military as a whole?
So first of all, we have to understand we're facing an enemy, which is Iran, the largest sponsor of state terrorism in the world. We are being attacked on 7 fronts by Iran. And if Iran thinks that Israel's vulnerable, like they felt on October 7th, that's when they launched their terror entities against us. What have we shown? And this is in direct answer to your question. We have eliminated now Hassan Nasrallah, Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Def, which is his number 2, and Ismail Haniyeh, the previous head of Hamas that was in Beirut, along with hundreds of other Hamas leaders. And the message is very clear, and this is an important military message. Wherever you are, if you think you're going to threaten Israel, you might run, you might try to hide even behind your own innocent civilians or in tunnels. Eventually, we will find you, and you will face justice. That is an important message to terrorists or to anyone thinking about being a terrorist. That should dissuade them from entering into this foray. At the same time, we have made phenomenal military progress. Our troops have moved forward through Gaza, eliminated much of Hamas, but we are not at the day after until we can reach the day before the day after, which is the complete dismemberment of that military organization.
Major Spielman, one other thing. The United States has asked Israel or has warned Israel that it faces a potential of stoppage of military support if it does not do more to allow aid into Gaza in the coming weeks. Can you explain to the American people what you are doing to ensure that not only more aid is entering Gaza to those civilians who need it, those innocent civilians, those children, but that the aid is actually reaching those who need it, which are not the terrorists, but the people who are trapped under the boot of those terrorists?
Absolutely. We take the United States concerns very seriously. I myself take them very seriously, and Israel takes the concerns also of the Gazan people very seriously. We have sent in thousands of tons of aid since the beginning of this war, and we're continuing even today. We had over 60 trucks of aid reach into northern Gaza. The situation is incredibly difficult because still, whatever remains of Hamas, their first priority is to get their hands on that aid. Also, all the humanitarian agencies, whether it be the United Nations agencies, in most cases have not been helpful. They've been unhelpful about distributing that aid. And so it's an incredible challenge. However, we've taken it very seriously. We've ramped up as much ability as we can to allow that aid into Gaza. I don't want to see these pictures on the screen any more than you do. You know, this was really Sinwar's plan. He was hoping that he would starve his own people so that world pressure would come on Israel. And in that respect, there has been some success. We should know that Sinwar died protected by 2 guards with tons of money on him, IDs, and a full stomach of food. That was the cowardly way that he died, but he left behind him all these Gazan people who are facing the hardships. We want to try to solve this. We want a brighter day for the people of Gaza. The elimination of Yahya Sinwar takes us this much closer to making that happen. We need a few more steps, and hopefully we can put this war behind us and see a brighter future for Israel, for Gaza, and for the Middle East.
And that is the hope for everyone. Major Dodan Spielman, thank you very much, sir, for spending some time with us. Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, we got much more news straight ahead. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Taylor Swift's Eras Tour will begin again tonight in Florida after nearly 2 months of a hiatus. She is kicking off the final leg of her tour. The final set of 18 shows will take her across the U.S. and Canada before ending in Vancouver this December. CBS News Miami reporter Morgan Reiner is following all the preparations for tonight's show.
Fans are simply ecstatic. To give you an example, there is a merchandise store here at the stadium, and when it opened up right away, it was slammed. We spoke to people that waited in line for hours, and these are people, some of them, that are not even attending the concert. They just wanted to get their hands on merchandise. We spoke to people that flew from across the country, Boston, Connecticut. I wouldn't be surprised if people are flying here from out of the country as well. And to give you an example of just how big this concert is, we spoke to the Tourism Bureau of Miami-Dade County, and they said they checked last weekend. We're at Friday. They checked last weekend, and they said that 2/3 of hotel rooms in Miami-Dade County were booked, and they linked it directly to the Taylor Swift concert. Now, if you want to get into ticket prices, the concert is sold out, but of course there are resale prices, and we checked prices this morning. I can tell you that for the 300 level, which is the very top level for a seat behind the stage, so you're not even going to see Taylor Swift, the cheapest price is $1,000. Now, if you want a seat on the other side, still the top level, but you want to be able to see Taylor Swift, you're looking at spending at least $2,000 on the cheapest of the tickets. In Miami Gardens, Morgan Reiner, CBS News.
All right, Morgan, thank you very much. Still ahead, a look at your weekend forecast. This is CBS News 24/7. Okay, we have a very happy update on a story we brought you after Hurricane Milton. This dog made headlines after police said he was left tied to a post. Some beepity-beep tied him to a post as the storm was approaching Florida. A state trooper rescued him. 5-year-old bull terrier was renamed Trooper in honor of that officer. In a very touching moment, our David Begnaud reunited Trooper with Trooper Orlando Morales, who saved his life. The dog is reportedly in great health. And get this, folks, after being evaluated by a vet, Trooper is now living with a foster family. Look how cute he is. I actually hope they find this guy. Rob Marciano is tracking weather for us. Rob, you remember that story when we were out there in Florida?
I do.
How horrible it was as that trooper approached that little puppy who was probably scared to death, and now he's got a happy home.
I love it. I love it. And you're right, beepity-boops or beepity-bops, whatever you call it, they're the worst. Absolutely
They are the worst.
If they were taking
Pox on their souls.
If they were taking Trooper out for a walk this morning, a little bit warmer than it was yesterday morning. Remember, we had record lows across much of Florida. Matter of fact, over a dozen of them across the east. No record lows in this part of the country to report to, but still chilly, 30s and 40s all the way down into parts of the deep south and rebounding nicely today, getting close to average temperatures. We do have some snow in the west, though. This is high atop Steamboat Springs Ski Resort. 3 inches of fresh snow starting to build the snowpack there. The gondola, the Wild Blue, not quite spinning yet, but getting folks who ride and ski a little bit more excited. We do have an atmospheric river that's coming into the Pacific Northwest. The first one this weekend. That's really the only sore spot. All right, if you're a Yankees or Guardians fan, we got Game 4 tonight. Looking good. Looking a little bit warmer in Cleveland. Didn't have time to include the Mets, and the Dodgers. Could be a deciding game tonight for them at Citi Field. Also milder, might not be well if Ohtani starts to feel his groove. The ball flies a little bit farther in warmer weather. Both will not see any rain. Vlad?
All right, Rob Marciano for us. Thank you, Rob. We'll see you next week. That does it for me, folks, but stay right where you are. Elizabeth Cook is live from San Francisco with all the breaking news coast to coast that's happening behind me after the break. This is CBS News 24/7.